Well, good morning, everyone. If I could interrupt you for a moment and have you take your seats, that would be terrific. Some seats just down here in front. And if I could ask our partners to come up on stage behind me, that would be terrific. You. Well, you're a very well-behaved group. Well, thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Greg Dowding. I'm the President of the Business Council of British Columbia. And our membership for the last 53 years comprises the 250 largest and leading employers in British Columbia. Every sector, every region of the province is represented by our membership, along with our post-secondary institutions that combined employ a quarter of British Columbians. I'd like to first recognize we're on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and thank you all for coming today. But before we get underway, I'd like to first recognize on behalf of all of us here the heartbreaking tragedy that occurred in Saskatchewan just last weekend that resulted in the loss of lives too soon and the injury of players, coaches, and team officials of the Humboldt Broncos hockey team. All of us want you to know that we are behind you. You are not alone. We grieve with you. We will stand with you. And we will continue to support the players, the team, and the family members and people of Humboldt and Saskatchewan as your friends and as fellow Canadians. And so to honor that, we have some hockey sticks recognizing the people of Humboldt and of our country. So thank you for coming today. We're here today because the organizations and individuals from communities and businesses behind me and present today in person and online across this country believe we're at a point of crisis of confidence in Canada, a crisis that needs leadership and immediate attention to resolve. Over the last 48 hours, we have experienced, as you will see and hear today, an unprecedented flood of concern and countrywide activism borne by the continued actions of the province of BC with regard to the recent announcement to suspend all non-essential spending on the federally and provincially approved Trans Mountain Pipeline project. This is no longer about a pipeline, but a referendum to see if you can rely on government process, regulations, and the rule of law with any degree of confidence if you choose to invest, create jobs, and prosperity in British Columbia and our country. It is a moment in time that the global and local investors and business community are watching, and this can have lasting consequences to our reputation and for our country if not resolved. Some will attempt to define today and this issue as an economy versus the environment debate. Others will portray this as business opposing activist governments. Both are wrong. This is about leadership in the face of difficult circumstances, but clear choices. It's about stability, our faith in democracy, the rule of law, and confidence in our country. As a result, leaders behind me from all walks of life and all parts of our province and our country are calling on national and provincial elected leaders to end this uncertainty and this crisis of confidence and to act to restore our reputation as a welcoming place to do business responsibly and with the certainty that benefits not just the boardroom table, but the kitchen table. The stakes are high right now for people, employers, our federation, and our collective future as a Canadian country. Our country for the last 150 years has depended on the democratic process and the cooperation of the Federation, driven by our elected leaders and laws, to enable the conditions for all citizens to dream and achieve their ambitions for themselves and their families. BC and Canada's first act of federal cooperation was the building of the Transcontinental Railway, with its terminus just steps from where we are today. Its vision and completion was the start of our country. More recently, that cooperation and process has fueled the building of the Convention Centre, bringing people from around the world to our province, just down the street. And it's also led to the expansion of our port, which is Canada's port. It moves Ontario auto parts, prairie grain, Alberta beef, and BC mining, energy, forestry, agri-food, and other products to global markets that want Canadian quality. It sets our standard of living as an open trading economy. Lastly, we recently witnessed a joint BC and Canada multi-billion-dollar announcement in transit projects and infrastructure that will improve our economy, affordability, climate, and quality of life in ways that we all care about and that will employ thousands of British Columbians and Canadians. The private sector locally and through international investment depends on that same democratic cooperation and the rule of law to support our collective prosperity. This confidence to invest and grow jobs and businesses generates revenues for the governments to provide services and fund education, healthcare, and social supports and the infrastructure that we often take for granted. It is this stability and adherence to the rule of law, democratic values, and cooperation from coast to coast to coast that's part of what makes us unique and, frankly, the envy of the world. In the case of BC and Alberta, the data is clear. It shows we are the most integrated economies in our federation, connected by pipes, roads, rail, trade, immigration, common values, history, and families. More specifically, for example, at the height of the energy industry just a few years ago, over 35,000 British Columbian residents traveled every week in trades, professional services, construction, manufacturing, transportation, environmental sciences to Alberta to grow their economy and Canada's economy. This directly benefited the economy of not just Alberta and BC, but the economies, businesses, and communities across this country, combined generating billions of dollars of federal and provincial tax revenue that was then shared through federal transfers to make our lives better, safer, healthier, both economically, environmentally, and personally. This isn't new. It's something we've always done as a country and as a people, and it's something that we collectively expect as citizens of Canada. These realities are now, sadly, at risk with the continued action of British Columbia, the reaction of Alberta, and the slow action of Ottawa to resolve this issue in the national interest. In the coming years, if this corrosive, self-interested behavior we are witnessing persists, the confidence and our reputation in the world as a place to live, work, and invest will be gone. We are therefore encouraged, as of just moments ago, that the Prime Minister and the Premiers will be meeting immediately to convene some solutions towards this issue, something we've been calling on for some days. We ask, and make no mistake, require that they use every tool necessary and in their disposal, including, if required, the expansion of the $1.5 billion Ocean Protection Plan to provide the leadership necessary to reestablish our confidence in Canada. And most importantly, ensure that that confidence remains not just on pipelines, but across our entire economy if we are to succeed and prosper as a nation. I'd now like to call on Val Letwin, the President and CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce, to act as our MC this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Greg said, I'll be your MC this morning, so my job is to make sure we move along at a fair clip and we make sure all our speakers are heard and we can honor your time. My name is Val Litwin. I'm the President and CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce. As BC's biggest and broadest business network, we have over 36,000 members hailing from every community around British Columbia. At the grassroots level, we represent 120 regional chambers and boards of trade, and our members are from every sector of the economy and represent every size of business. I should also note that our Canadian Chamber of Commerce has also signed our letter to the Prime Minister, and that organization represents over 200,000 businesses from coast to coast in Canada. At the BC Chamber, our purpose is to know what's on BC's mind. And I can tell you, investment is on BC's mind. More precisely, our members are wondering if Canada and BC is still a sound place to invest. They are concerned our reputation as a top-tier market to do business in is being eroded, and they wonder if federally approved projects deemed to be in the national interest can really get built. In short, there is a crisis of confidence. The BC Chamber has supported the Trans Mountain expansion since day one, and our support continues to this day. Indeed, our most recent data from our pan-provincial collective perspective survey shows our members' support for the pipeline outpaces opposition by a factor of 2 to 1. Key investments in an oceans protection strategy, knowing dozens of First Nations will benefit, and understanding that the proponent went through a robust 3-year environmental assessment and approvals process has helped clarify for our members that this project is right for BC and it's right for Canada. But today we find ourselves at an impasse, and the implications are seismic. If we can't build this project, it will show the world that government approvals and rule of law count for nothing in Canada, and we cannot let this happen. Make no mistake, if this pipeline can't move forward, it will have broad implications for resource development in BC and in Canada, and investment in general. So it is time to restore confidence in this project, and it is time to restore confidence in Canada. Today you will hear from 5 speakers representing a range of sectors and interests, but they all have one thing in common. They want to see the Kinder Morgan pipeline built because they believe it's right for BC and it is right for Canada. With that, thank you. So with that, let me introduce our next speaker this morning. I would like to call up my colleague Laura Jones to the podium. Laura is the Executive Vice President and Chief Strategic Officer with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. The CFIB represents over 110,000 members, and it is a champion for small business across the country, dedicated to creating an environment where business can succeed. Please welcome Laura.
Thanks very much. I think it would be tempting maybe for some to see this as just a big business issue. It's not. Whether a business is big or small, it's important to have confidence that governments at all levels will respect the laws of this country. Creating mayhem and mischief with respect to a project that has already been approved is clearly at odds with this. It puts our economic security at risk, and it cannot be allowed to stand. This is why we're calling on the federal government to use every tool in its toolbox to get us back to certainty and allow this project to proceed. A decision was made on this project after a rigorous process was followed. Now, I get that not everyone liked the decision. The same can be said for many other big decisions. But once a decision has been made, whether it's to build a pipeline or set aside land for a national park or grant a small business a permit to operate, it needs to be respected. Yes needs to mean yes. If the uncertainty around this project is allowed to continue, it threatens to do serious damage to the country's international reputation, to people's confidence in government, and to the relations within this country between governments. This is not good. We need to find a better path forward, and we need to do that now. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Now we're going to hear from Chris Gardner, President of the Independent Contractors and Business Association, the voice of BC's construction industry, representing more than 2,000 members and clients, and the single largest sponsor of apprentices in BC. Chris?
Thank you, Val. This morning, 250,000 men and women in construction got up, went to a job site, and did what they do best, help build British Columbia. Their work accounts for approximately 10% of our economy. That's why this project is so vitally important. Whether you're a pipe fitter, a gas fitter, an electrician, a carpenter, a plumber, a laborer working on a job site, This kind of investment is vital for our construction sector, and it's vital for our economy. When construction declines, so does every community in British Columbia. And there is a crisis of confidence in British Columbia and Canada right now. And there are three issues that are vitally important. First, Kinder Morgan did nothing wrong. In fact, for 10 years they planned this project. For nearly 4 years they went through a rigorous independent review where they amended their plans, listened to stakeholders, and at the end of that process, the independent federal regulator approved the project. Subsequent to that, the provincial government of the day signed off on the project. And then finally, Prime Minister Trudeau and his cabinet approved the project. What Premier Horgan is doing is effectively tearing up a contract. He's ripping apart an agreement that is sound, that was approved, that is rigorous, and that cannot stand. The second issue that the Premier has done is that he has ignited a trade war with Alberta. In Canada, we're successful as a team. When we're together and we're united, we can compete with the best in the world. When we're divided, we will fail. I never thought I would see the day where Alberta would be drawing up legislation to limit the import of oil and gas into British Columbia and to stop BC goods at the Alberta border. It doesn't make sense. It's not Canadian. The third issue is that the Port of Vancouver exists so that businesses across this country can ship their goods to markets and customers beyond our borders. And it's vitally important for our economy. Premier Horgan doesn't get to pick and choose what goods run through that port. That's the job of the federal government. And there's a reason for that. We can't have one province in a successful confederation holding other provinces to ransom. What we're asking for today is very simple. For Prime Minister Trudeau to act and to act decisively in the national interest. The energy sector in this country is on its knees. Project after project has been delayed or cancelled. Last week, the CEO of the Royal Bank of Canada stood up and said investors are leaving Canada. We're witnessing this in real time. If we're going to succeed as a country, we have to recognize we're competing internationally, and investors have a choice, and those dollars are moving to the United States, they're moving to Australia, they're moving to other jurisdictions that are open for investment. This project has to move forward, and we're calling on the Prime Minister to act decisively, and get this project built. It's time to get shovels in the ground and build Kinder Morgan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I will now call on Dennis Connor. Dennis is the spokesperson for the BC Clean Technology Voices Group, who recently wrote to Premier Horgan expressing concern about opposition to the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the potential impacts that opposition may have on Canada's climate agenda. Please welcome Dennis Connor.
Thank you, Val. As Val said, 3 weeks ago, 27 leaders of the BC clean technology and climate technology industry sent a letter to Premier Horgan asking him to stop opposing the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. If he succeeds in stopping TMX, he will likely cause the unraveling of the Canadian Climate Accord and our commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement. As you know, Canada played a significant role in Paris. A failure to deliver on our climate commitments would severely damage our credibility as a country to work with and to invest in. In particular, in Paris, governments and the private sector agreed to support the development and deployment of breakthrough climate technologies needed to avert climate change. Now, I am involved with 4 such breakthrough climate technology companies based here in British Columbia. And those companies are strongly supported by the likes of Microsoft's Bill Gates and Amazon's Jeff Bezos. We need them to continue to work with us and invest. Let me say, however, I'm also concerned about the continued use of fossil fuels. But I know that the transition away from them is going to take 10, 20, 30 years, driven by technologies that already exist, such as solar power, wind turbines, electric vehicles. But those technologies are by themselves not sufficient to avert climate disaster. Hence the need for new breakthrough technologies. Now, if the protesters, abetted by the province, stop the pipeline, we believe the climate accord will go away, and so will support for the development of those technologies. It will be a short-term win for the environmentalists concerned about our coastline. But in the long term, climate change is much more likely to occur. And in that case, the sea levels will rise and our whole coastline will be inundated. The protesters are not thinking clearly about the unintended consequences of their protests. Also, the world's thirst for oil will be quenched whether or not the Trans Mountain Pipeline is built, and it will probably be supplied by oil from sources with no carbon pricing and lax environmental standards. Consequently, we believe Canada should build the Trans Mountain Pipeline so that our economy remains strong, and that will allow us to implement our climate plan, including support for the technologies I've alluded to. Such support is a key part of the Pan-Canadian Climate Accord and was reiterated last week by Prime Minister Trudeau in a meeting with a number of BC clean technology leaders. We urged him to stay the course on the Trans Mountain Pipeline because it too is key to the Climate Accord. And we also urge Premier Horgan to find a way to resolve this impasse that he is causing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. It is now my pleasure to invite Mayor Henry Braun of the City of Abbotsford. Abbotsford is the BC city with the most territory crossed by the pipeline, and we are so pleased he could join us here today to speak on this important matter for his community. So please welcome Mayor Henry Braun.
Thank you, Val. It's good to be here this morning. As the mayor of the fifth largest city in British Columbia, I have more than enough things on my plate. But when I heard about this yesterday, there comes a time when leadership has to stand up and say something at the local level, and so that day for me is today. I agree with everything that's been said, so I'll keep my remarks brief. But what is of key significance is the way the province is choosing to address this matter, which is placing the global reputation of our country as a safe and secure place to invest and do business at risk. I understand that some may have questions about our regulatory processes, and I respect that. And there are ways to address that. However, the path that we are currently on is not one of them. And in fact, it will create a crisis of confidence in our country's ability to be seen as a trusted place to invest. This is a problem that every British Columbian and every Canadian should be concerned about. Do I want my grandchildren and their children to grow up in a world less dependent on fossil fuel? Absolutely, you bet. But I also want them to grow up in a province and a country with a stable and growing economy. And that transition, as Dennis rightly pointed out, will take 10, 20, 30 years perhaps. We cannot turn this on like a light switch and go from one source of energy to others. This is a transition, and we need to be, as elected officials, we need to be honest with the people of our province and our country that this is what it's going to take. We have to ensure that the rule of law in this country works and means something, because if it doesn't, I'm not sure where we're going. And my hope, I was pleasantly pleased to read this morning on my Twitter feed that the Prime Minister will be coming back and meeting with Premier Horgan and Premier Notley. And my encouragement to them and to everyone who is listening to this is that they find a solution and ensure that our economy and our crisis of confidence that we have in this country right now has been resolved so that we can provide the things that our citizens across the land are looking for government at all three levels to provide them. So thank you for being here.
Thanks very much, Mayor Braun. My name is Susan Yurkovich, and I'm President and CEO of the BC Council of Forest Industry. As many of you in this room know, the forest industry is a foundational industry in this province. It generates 1 in every 17 jobs, 140,000 across 140 communities in our province. The reason that we're here is really simple. We operate in a global environment, and we ship most of our high-quality wood products to markets around the world where we face ongoing and increasing competition. We need to be competitive, and we need to be able to attract the capital that allows us to invest in our facilities and equipment that in turn supports thousands of jobs and families in this province. To do that, we have to have faith in our processes. We need to know that if you do the work, you follow the rigorous requirements that are in place for resource development in this province, and in the end, you get a decision to proceed, we need to know that that decision will be respected. We believe that the impasse over the Trans Mountain project has really shaken that faith. As a result, our reputation and our ability to invest, to build, to operate, and to employ people in our businesses in BC and across the country is at risk. That's why this group of citizens, organizations, communities have come together in an unprecedented way with common resolve. We've done this because, as you've heard from the rest of the folks, we believe we are facing a crisis of confidence in Canada. Today, more than 70 organizations and businesses, labor, municipalities in our province and across the country, acting in partnership, have been calling for the Prime Minister to immediately convene a meeting. As you heard, we understand that that is now in the works and perhaps moving forward this weekend. We encourage them to get to the table, to work it out, to respect each other's opinions, but act in the interest of all Canadians, because that's what we do in this country. That's what we do as Canadians. We need an immediate resolution to this impasse. We are asking our leaders to be creative, to find solutions, look for ways to move forward, including options to expand the Oceans Protection Plan if required. Do what it takes to provide the leadership necessary to reestablish confidence in Canada and our reputation as a place to do business and grow our country's prosperity. I think you should know that today's gathering is not a one-off. There are more organizations and communities who are going to be joining us in the days ahead. And we're going to continue to make our voices heard until the proper function of the Federation and the rule of law is respected and the confidence that is required for investment is repaired. We're inviting all of you to join us and to make your voices heard. Just a few moments ago, we launched a website called confidenceincanada.com. And we're asking all of you in this room, all of the people who you represent, your employees and businesses, communities, First Nations who support this project, to go to that site and register your voice. It's going to enable you to call with us to the Prime Minister and the Premiers of BC and Alberta, along with their cabinet colleagues, ask them to lead and ask them to restore confidence that enables your personal and national prosperity. Just before closing, I know there's a lot of media folks here. There's many folks behind me here and also in the room who are available to you following the conference if you have questions for them. They have speakers tags on them to help you out. I'd also ask everybody, we do have a copy of the letter that we have sent to the Prime Minister, the Premier, and Premier Notley today. Please come up and sign it and add your voice, as well as on our website. In closing, on behalf of all of the folks that we are representing, millions of employees, employers, organizations, First Nations, community leaders who support responsible resource development in Canada, I want to thank you for being here and urge you to join with us to restore confidence in Canada. Thank you.
There's another one down there. There we go.
Saw you here. How are you?
That's great, Ron.
You too. Good job.
Swap that up.
James, I'm going to kill myself.
Just quickly, you mentioned about, we were getting together. You were saying about pull out all the stops in order to see if they can work something out. You mentioned about, maybe even finding a Singapore. And I guess I just wanted to ask a little more about that. Are there, we like to try to practice take care of business